Today's scripture reading brings us to 2 Samuel chapter 5. And in this chapter, we see that it's divided into 4 sections. At least that's how I divide it. If you want to divide, of course, these chapters a different way, feel free to do so. It's not, some hard and fast rule. But I have it divided into 4 sections. And the first one I have is David is anointed king over all Israel. Now, prior to this, Ishbosheth has been assassinated. Israel is without a king. They are without any clear successor, because the only successor that has been mentioned that has not been killed is Mephibosheth, which is the crippled son of Jonathan, grandson of Saul, which obviously wasn't even considered to, continue the lineage there of Saul. So all of the elders of Israel, it says there in verse number 1, they come down to David and they mention 2 things. They recalled David's past. We see both of these in verse number 2. Also, in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel. And then they remembered God's promise, and that was, and the Lord said to thee, thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be captain over Israel. But so because of David's past, he had proved himself, because they knew God's promise upon David, then the elders came down and anointed him, asked him essentially to be their king. And David accepted this, and it says there that they anointed David king over all Israel in verse number 3. Now, verses 4 and 5 just detail, the years in which David had been king. He was 30 years old when he became king over Hebron, in Hebron over the tribe of Judah. He would be king for 7.5 years there. He would be king for 33 more years over all of Israel, for a total of 40 years. If you want to be a stickler about it, it's 40 years and 6 months. So David is anointed king over all Israel. And in verses 6 through 10, I have that titled, David Captures Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem, we're all familiar with Jerusalem, right? Well, Jerusalem was in the land of Canaan, but it wasn't inhabited by the Jews. It was inhabited by the Jebusites, and they had been there all the way back since Joshua's day. The reason they had been there is because it was in a very tough spot to attack. It had valleys on 3 sides. There was only one way upon land that you could really bring an attack from, and that was from the north. So it was a stronghold. That was one of the reasons why it would have been a good capital for David to set up shop in. The second is because it was situated right on the border between Judah and the tribe of Benjamin's land. So therefore, it wasn't showing partiality or favoritism between David's tribe of Judah or Saul's tribe of Benjamin, but it was just a wonderful place to set up shop. Obviously, God directed him there for that reason. And the Jebusites, they were so confident that David could not take the city. They told him there in verse number 6, the only way you're going to take this is if you take the blind and the lame out. That's the only way you're going to get it. They were so confident that David could not sack the city that they were saying even the blind and the lame could keep you out. So David says, whoever goes up, and he gives them the way to do it, and that is go up by the gutters. They had a water duct that you could traverse to gain access and entry into the city. If you read in, I think it's 1 Chronicles, it says that Joab was the one that did that and became chief captain over the tribe. So David captures Jerusalem, and it's known as the city of David from henceforth moving forward. Then verses 11 through 16, I have that title, David's house is built and described. And I'm talking about 2 houses. I'm talking about a physical house, and I'm also talking about his house as in his lineage, is mentioned in these few verses here. David's palace is built by Hiram, king of Tyre. We see that, brought the cedar trees, carpenters, the masons, and he built him a house there in verse number 11. And then he begins mentioning children that were born of David when he had come to Jerusalem. Now, David had children from when he was his time in Hebron. Now he's going into Jerusalem, and you see there in verse number 13, David took him more concubines and wives. It's just, the flesh was a problem for David. I've already said, David was a man after God's own heart, but he was still in the flesh. That's why he sinned with Bathsheba. That's why he's taken on all these wives and concubines. So one thing to note, too, is that this is not in historical accuracy, what I'm trying to say is this is not happening right now, because you see that Solomon is mentioned in there. He's child of Bathsheba, and we haven't heard about her yet. So this is a parenthetical thought that these are children that were born during his time in Jerusalem, not in this particular time, but throughout the next 33 years that he's here. And then verses 17 through 25, I have that titled, God Directs Victories Over the Philistines. Twice, you see two different conflicts between the children of Israel and the Philistines, and in both instances, David went to the Lord and asked, what should I do? And man, it's like we see really the duality of man coming to be in this chapter. We see the flesh part of David we just spoke of, and now you see the spiritual part of David. And he says there in verse number 19, when the Philistines, they realize, hey, this ain't the David that we thought. He's not in our hip pocket. He has expanded his land. He is now king over everybody. And so now the Philistines are come to challenge him. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord said, go up, I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thy hands. So he went, and so God did. And then notice this in verse number 21, and there they left their images, that's their idols, that's their gods, and David and his men burned them. That's what David thought about their gods, and that's the way he treated their gods. And I still think that's the best way. I don't think it's the best way just to live and let live, in the sense that false gods do not go unchallenged. I think it's our duty as Christians to make sure that we do the best we can to burn down false images that are leading people to hell. So, that being said, they had to, during the battle, they had to flee so quickly that they even left their gods behind, and David and his men burned them. And then they came again there, verse number 22, and David again goes to the Lord and says, Lord, what should I do? And he didn't assume that the same thing God wanted him to do the first time, he wanted him to do this time. So he went to the Lord, and the Lord actually said, no, I don't want you to do it this time. This is what I want you to do. I want you to go in behind them. I want you to compass around behind them, and then go over against the mulberry trees. And then when you hear the sound of the going in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then shall the Lord go out before thee and smite the host of the Philistines. Now, just picture yourself there. God has given you that direction, and you've got all your men, and you have compassed around to the back behind them, and you're in the mulberry trees, and you're waiting for the moment, and you hear just nothing, right? There's no sound. And then all of a sudden you hear the come through the trees. Man, that's got to be an encouraging sound. And then that stirred them, and then they went and they got the Philistines, and they whipped them from Geba onto a Gazer there, and they reclaimed land that Saul had lost in his last battle. So that's going to be 2 Samuel chapter 5. And I hope this has been a help to you. Lord willing, we will see you tomorrow.